Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Living Manna Church. Hi, I'm Pastor Dave Sain, Senior Shepherd here at Living Manna. I hope that you are having a good week. It's Wednesday night, the middle of the week, which means, of course, for us, it's Bible study. Thank you so much for hanging out with me tonight. I sincerely appreciate it. We are in the midst of the days of awe. That is the days between the blowing of the shofar and Yom Kippur. We're right in the middle of it. Make sure you check out our morning mannas. We've been talking about all sorts of different things, but certainly we've been focusing lately on names, and we're going to talk a little bit about what it means to be in the days of awe. We're in the fall feast. The fall feast are here. Tabernacles is right around the corner. Looking so forward to it. Let's see. Just by way of information, everybody, this upcoming Saturday on our Shabbat service, we're going to be celebrating our Yom Kippur. Even though Yom Kippur is not until Monday, we're not going to have a service on that day, but we're going to tell you a little bit about what you can do at home. It's not necessarily a feast day where we have to come and get together. We're going to talk about it on Saturday, what it means, what its prophetic importance is, and maybe what we should be doing ourselves and realizing and understanding. Remember that it is a high Sabbath, so that's that Monday, but we're going to be celebrating it on Saturday. We're going to have the following week, then begins Tabernacles. That's on the following Shabbat, the following Saturday. We're going to have some fellowship. We're going to have a couple of different messages, got some really neat stuff coming up for you. We're going to be talking about all sorts of crazy things, the beast, the mark, all that kind of stuff. That's going to be from Saturday to Wednesday to Saturday during the week of Tabernacles. And of course, don't forget, we're going to have a Friday night, just worship and praise and get together and hang out. So we look forward to seeing all of you guys. And I do believe Brother Max is also going to be coming down for Tabernacles. So we look forward to seeing him and the family. And certainly, if you're in the area, come visit with us. We'd love to have you, love to fellowship with you as we celebrate these fall feasts. Not just the letter of the law, but we understand what the spirit of the law actually is. Okay, so with all that, I think those are the commercials. Well, the regular commercials. Guys, if you're not yet subscribed, please, please, please subscribe. Hit that subscribe button and the bell there to be notified every time we go live. Give us a thumbs up if you enjoy the study so that it gets pushed out to other people. And certainly, if you do enjoy the studies, if you are part of LMC, if you're being fed by the things that we do, there's a whole bunch of different ways that you can support us. Certainly, the best way is through the app. You can download the LMC app. You can go right to Google Play Store, the App Store, the blue and white logo, the LM, Living Manna Church. You can download that, and there's information on there on how you can give. We really, really appreciate your support, and we apologize so much for the technical difficulties as of late. But that's what happens with electronics. But we're getting better. we're replacing things. So anyway, we thank you so much for your support, both financially and spiritually. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Okay. So, I just saw a thing up on our chat on Living Manna Eaters. Sister Ruth is finally home. She's been in the hospital for the week. She just got home. So we're really, really happy for you, Sister Ruth. Glad to see it, and glad that you're home finally. And thumbs up to you, Sister JoJo. You're doing a great job there. Okay, now I think that's all the commercials for today. Here we are. It's Bible study time. And let me put this up so you guys can see it. The title for tonight is You Are the Temple. You are the temple. Of course, this is part of our bigger series that we've been doing for quite a while now. That is the series on the patterns. We've been talking about the temple for multiple weeks. We're going to continue. There's still so much more information to get to you concerning the temple. We're going to talk to you about an aspect of it today. And ultimately, what we are building up to, all of this is the groundwork to eventually, hopefully, really wrap our minds around what the abomination of desolation really means, how it affects us today. What was the Master speaking about? What is Saul speaking about when he refers to these? What is Revelation talking about? We'll get there. We won't get there today, but we will get there. Okay, so let me do this. Let me make this a little bit bigger for you guys so that you guys can see the notes. The notes are online. You can download them in a description below on the YouTube, or certainly if you're watching through the app or you have the app available, the notes are there for you as well. So you can follow along. And of course, they're going to be right up on the screen anyway, so you can see them. Okay, so with all of that, you are the temple. Let's open up with a word of prayer and we'll jump right into this study. Abba, give us eyes to see, ears to hear, and a heart that's willing to obey. In the Master's name, amen. Amen. Okay, so you are the temple. Now, these are familiar verses. We've been talking about this for a while. I don't want to do a whole review on all the different parts of the temple we've been talking about, but it is imperative that you watch the previous studies because each study builds upon the one that came before it. And we're building up an idea. We're building up a foundation to get us to understand something later on. This is how Abba teaches us. This is how Father has laid out his word. So we want to try to do it the same way. That is to build a foundation, build a layer of understanding. And then each week, the picture becomes more and more and more clear until finally, ultimately, hopefully, at some point, we're going to be like, oh, okay, I got it. Now I understand. Now I understand what that means. So here we are. This is really familiar ground. We've touched this before. This is the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 24 and verse 1 through 5. And it says the following. And this is just prior to the Master's death, just prior to Passover. Verse 1 says, "And going out, the Master went away from the set-apart place, and his taught ones came near to point out to him all the buildings of the set-apart place." The Hekel, if you have a scriptures version, sometimes it uses the word Hekel, but it means temple. Verse 2, "And the Master said to them, 'Do you not see all these,'" meaning all the buildings of the temple, "'Truly I say to you, not one stone shall be left there upon another at all, which shall not be thrown down.' And as he sat on the Mount of Olives, the taught ones came to him separately, saying, 'Say to us, when shall these things be? And what is the sign of your coming and the end of the age?' And the Master answering said to them, 'Take heed that no one leads you astray. For many shall come in my name, saying, I am the Messiah, and they shall lead many astray. Now, I got another verse. We're going to share verse 15. Well, let's just read it. Verse 15 right there. Let me just highlight this so you guys can see it. We're right here in verse 15. So I'm skipping a couple of verses just to get to this point. This is all Matthew 24. We left off at like verse 5. This is 10 verses later. The master talks about what his coming is going to look like. But then he gives us a marker. He says, so when you see the abomination of desolation, or the abomination that lays waste, i.e. the temple, and we're going to talk about this later, but he's talking about the Hanukkah story, spoken of by Daniel the prophet. So eventually we got to get into the book of Daniel. We got to look at Daniel and see what Daniel's saying about all this. Not today, but we'll get there. Set up in the set apart place, that is in the temple. But then he puts, he who reads, let him understand. And every time you see he who reads, let him understand, or he that has an ear, let him hear, or this takes wisdom, or he who has wisdom. Every time you see that, you have to realize there's more there than meets the eye. He's not talking about a literal letter interpretation. He's talking about something much, much bigger. The idea of moving from the letter to the spirit. And so he says here, let him who reads, let him understand. Then let those who are in Judah flee to the mountains, out to the wilderness. Okay, so one really important thing I want to highlight for you, because this is a real big clue. Now, we're not going to talk about the abomination of desolation yet, at least not today. We may make some allusions to it or allude to it a little bit, but this is the master really threw us out a spiritual bone here to give us a little bit of a glimpse, a little bit of a taste of what's coming. And really, he's sort of telling us the whole picture, but it's almost in passing. You can read right over it and not realize what he's saying. But verse 5 there, he warns the disciples, many are going to come in my name, and they're going to say, I am Messiah. And obviously, there's been lots of people that have done that. But once we get into the abomination of desolation, once we understand what this story is about, you're going to realize how important a statement that is, because the master's actually telling us what the great deception is going to be about. It's going to be about a false Messiah. And he's telling us right here exactly what's going to happen. And yet so many of us just skip right over it and don't realize what he's saying. But anyway, so this is familiar. This should be familiar to us. We've talked about this a couple of times already. And with that, the master is telling them the temple is going to come down. Now, we spent a whole bunch of time talking about the temple in a whole bunch of different ways. But here's where we left off. Here's the concept of the idea. Here is the spiritual application. We know what the temple is from a literal sense. We know what the temple is from a letter sense. The temple is a building in Jerusalem full of gold and silver and purple and scarlet and bread and flour and honey and all of these wonderful things. That's the temple. That's the temple in Jerusalem. That's its letter. But what we really must understand is what is the spiritual application, what that has always been the spiritual application. Because the temple, like we've heard Saul say to us multiple times in all of our studies, it's a tutor. It's a teaching tool that Abba has used to help us to understand the bigger picture. And again, this is how Abba speaks to us. He speaks to us in layers. He gives us examples. He helps build a foundation so that eventually we can understand what the whole picture is. And as you go throughout history, there were points in history where all you had was the foundation. So you had to be faithful to the foundation. Here we are at our day and age. Not only do we have the foundation, but we've got an idea of what the building looks like. We're at the end of this thing, so we should know a whole lot more than they knew or realized back in their day. But here is Saul absolutely giving us the spiritual application. And I want you to pay real close attention, especially to the PDP version, because we're going to connect this to something later, to two different aspects of the temple that I want to talk about today that have everything to do with us. Here is 1 Corinthians chapter 6, and starting not at verse 19, we're starting at verse 15. And it says this, so we're right here. We're going to start at verse 15. and listen to Saul. This is Rabbi Shaul. And listen, you can read the whole chapter of 1 Corinthians 6 there. It's a great chapter, and there's some information that comes before this, but for time's sake, let's just pick it up at verse 15. He says, do you not know that your bodies are members? Now, I'm putting in there in the PDP version because I want to connect this to all the other things that we found out already. It's not just that we are members of his body, we are betrothed, right? He has come, Passover has come, the dowry has been paid, the bride has been paid for and or redeemed. We've met the groom, we know the covenant, he's initiated new promises to the covenant, he's renewed the covenant. So when it says that we are members of his body, we normally think of that sort of in the way that, of the religious world that we've all come out of at some point, that, I've accepted him, so therefore I'm a member of him. But what it really means is we're betrothed to him. And betrothal means something a whole lot different. And you'll see why this is so important. So he says, do you not know that your bodies, meaning this body, the body that we live in, are members, or we are betrothed of Messiah, or to Messiah? Shall I then take, and now it makes a little bit more sense, shall I then take the betrothed bride, members of Messiah, and make them members of a whore? Now I put in there in the PDP, Ohala and Ohaliba. We're going to get there in a second. If you don't realize what that reference is to yet, we're going to get there, I promise. Just hold on, put that in the back of your mind for a second. So realize the analogy is saying, if you are the betrothed bride of Messiah, you cannot connect yourself to a whore, to a harlot. In fact, look what he says. I put it there in green. Let it not be. Absolutely not. Don't do that. Verse 16. So he's going to use the physical to help us understand something. Or do you not know that he who is joined to a whore, to a harlot, is one body? He's talking about, obviously, the physical action of copulation here. For he says, the two shall become one flesh. Now, he's talking about marriage, but he's talking about the sexual acts that go on within marriage. And he's saying you do that as a harlot, you become one with the harlot. Verse 17, and he who is joined to the master is one spirit. Verse 18, flee whoring. Now, I put there in the PDP version, and we've talked about this before. You can go back and listen to the studies on adultery, listen to the studies on idolatry to find more out about this. But it says flee whoring or idolatry, because that's really what he's talking about. And I'll explain why in just a second. Every sin that a man does is outside of the body, outside of the temple. But he who commits whoring or he who commits idolatry sins against his own body, the temple. So he's using the physical act of adultery, or the physical act of harlotry. And don't forget, in this day, all of the temples to all of the gods had temple prostitutes, had men and women and boys and girls that you could go to, and part of the worship was sexual. And he's telling us that adultery or harlotry, all the other sins we do, you do to other people, you do outside, you hurt other people. But idolatry or adultery, you're actually hurting yourself. You're hurting the inside of the temple, because once you're joined with it, he just told us, you become one with it. So there's the physical aspect, the earthly aspect that he's referring to, as is true in his day. But there's a much, much, much bigger picture going on here, as well as to the temple, the body, we being the body of Messiah, the betrothed of Messiah, the temple of Elohim. Now it's on a spiritual issue. There are sins we can do outside the body, affecting all sorts of people. But idolatry, adultery, and then we need to understand what those things are, because those things we do on the inside. Those are things we do in our heart. And we'll get there more in just a second. So here we go. Verse 19, He says, or do you not know? So he's going to explain the whole thing. Do you not know the spiritual end of it now? Do you not know that your body is, is the temple, or it says here, the dwelling place, or this the set apart dwelling place, or the dwelling place of the set apart Spirit, the Holy Spirit, who is in you, which you have from Elohim, and you are not your own. We just finished saying, well, we're not just members of the body of Messiah. We are betrothed. We are paid for. The bridal dowry, the Passover, has paid for us already. So he's telling us the price has already been given to Father. The Hebrew marriage is already occurring. The price has been paid. You no longer belong to yourself. You belong to the Master. You belong to Abba, the Father, but you are betrothed to the Master. So, for you were bought with a price, the bridal dowry, which is, of course, this Passover. Therefore, glorify or esteem Elohim in your body and in your spirit, which are of Elohim. So he's making a comparison here of earthly things that are going on. That is, within those temples, within the pagan temples, all the sexual stuff that goes on, which is really part of worship or idolatry. And he's equating it as our bodies being the temple, and that you can offend, you can make unclean, you can desecrate, you can cause abominations to the temple, to the real temple, which temple you are, i.e., the title of today's message. So, summary of all of this, you cannot be the betrothed bride of Elohim and connected to a harlot at the same time. This is real important. I know it sounds like real elementary, real simple, but this is profound because this is a major issue today. You cannot be the betrothed, the one who has been separated to the Master, the one who has Abba's Spirit in it, the one who is. Now, we are all the temple of Elohim, but we are the bought temple of Elohim. When I say we're all the temple of Elohim, I mean every person out there has a body. Every person is the temple. It's always been about this fleshly temple, not about a temple with buildings. Go back, listen to some of the other studies. So we've all got temples, but this is telling us you and I have been bought. The dowry has been paid, and you cannot be the betrothed of Messiah and be a harlot at the same time. Now, granted, there's very often a process of going from one to the other, but at some point we have to realize, just as the Master says in some of the gospel teachings, that he's talking about money in this particular case, but he says you cannot serve God and mammon. That is the things of the world, things of finance, the lust of money is the root of all evil. You cannot serve that and serve Elohim. But the point that he's making is you have to make up your mind. You have to decide at some point what side of the line I'm on, because you cannot have a foot in each camp. If you do, then, and we are somehow joined to a harlot, but still have a foot in what we understand, or what we're beginning to understand, trying to understand, say that we understand in Elohim, be the betrothed. If we've got a foot in both camps, then, as Saul just said to us, then we have aligned or connected our bodies to a harlot. And just as he said, the two shall become one. And again, by harlotry, we mean idolatry. All right, so just a real simple principle. This is Saul. So we're going to get back to Matthew 24 in a second, talk about what he's talking about with all the destruction and everything, and obviously get to the abomination of desolation. But this is paramount for today. We have to understand this is what it's always been about. It's always been about a body. You know, Abba, Psalms tells us Abba did not want offerings and slaughter offerings and meal offerings. He wanted a body, a human body. Messiah, and obviously us as living stones being built up a temple to our God. So very, very important point. I want to make sure you guys, excuse me, take that and put it in the back of your mind. Excuse me. Put that in the back of your spiritual thinking, and we're going to get back to that in a second, and we're going to connect all of this. So here we go. Next verse for today. Now, you know me, I love charts. So here's a chart. Today we're going to talk about two warnings, two patterns of the temple that out of three, because there's actually three in total that I want to talk about, but we're only going to get to two of them today. And on the timeline here, just so you guys can see it, there is, when it comes to the temple, obviously the first time the temple is destroyed is by Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar's army. I think it's Nebuzaradan is the general that goes down. And they didn't even want to destroy the temple at first, but because of the insolence of the people, of the king, they wound up eventually destroying Jerusalem, all of Jerusalem, and destroying the temple as well. It gets burned to the ground. This is the time of Ezekiel, Daniel, Jeremiah. Right? These are the prophets who are writing. This is important because when you read all of them, they all talk about harlotry and idolatry going on specifically in the temple. So there's the pattern. What goes on with the temple is relevant to you and I later on because it sets the pattern or the precedent of both the problem and the solution later on to the problem. And if we are the temple of Elohim, then these patterns are very important to us. Abba tells us the ending from the beginning. Well, for you and I, this is the beginning. So let's learn the beginning, see what the patterns are, and it will better help us understand where we are today, what's going on today, what's going on with this temple that you and I live in today, and how important all of this stuff really is to us. And really, ultimately, what we want to get to is right over here, the abomination of desolation. But like I said, it's just a teaser. We're not going to get there today. Soon we're going to get there. So during the time of the first temple, around the time Ezekiel, Daniel, Jeremiah, these are all writers during that time, Ezekiel's going to talk about Ohala and Oholibah. And we're going to get there in a second. There are two things that occur. Ohala being the northern house, Oholibah being the southern house. The northern house being called Israel, making up of the 10 tribes, and the southern kingdom called Judah, making up of 2.5 tribes. Levi sort of mixed between the both of them, but 2 tribes. The kingdom of Judah, which later on, by the time Messiah comes, is the kingdom of Israel, the only kingdom of Israel there is left. But they're broken up into 2 different sisters we're going to read about in just a second. And they don't do the same thing. They don't suffer. Well, they suffer for a similar thing, but not exactly the same thing. And the difference is important because it helps us understand kind of what's going on today, where we are today. Ohala absolutely rejects Elohim. I mean, just outrightly rejects Elohim and just takes on the worship of the nations around it. This is the whole story of Elijah and Jezebel and Ahab and, the prophets of Baal. There was an absolute rejection of the things of Elohim after the dividing of the nation from the northern house to the southern kingdom. And eventually, Yah scatters them. But the southern kingdom has a little bit of a different issue. They don't outright reject Elohim. They mix the things of the pagans with the knowledge of Elohim. And that's a totally different monster. Still, neither one is good. Both of them are done to the temple, as we'll see in a second. But this is the first temple. These are the reasons why the northern house is scattered, the southern house is scattered, and eventually the temple in Judah is destroyed in Jerusalem. Afterwards, after Babylon, once they come back from Babylon, which is recorded here in the book of Zechariah, he talks about the second temple, the building of the second temple, the temple of Joshua, the high priest Joshua, not the Joshua we know, either in the Torah or the master himself, but the high priest Joshua and Zerubbabel, the building of the temple. So read Zechariah. We're going to get into Zechariah at some point. We'll do a whole study on Zechariah. But so the second temple gets built at this time. It gets refurbished later on, as time goes on, eventually by Herod. But before that, during the time of this second temple, is when this event occurs. And you know what? Let me just use a different color. This way it stands out that is when this event occurs. That is the actual, the literal abomination of desolation as spoken of by Daniel. It occurs because Daniel is the one who writes it. And of course, this is spoken of by the master. We just finished reading it in Matthew 24. He says, he that has an ear or this takes wisdom. So eventually we have to learn what this story is of the original abomination of desolation in order to then take all the principles that we've learned and understand what it actually means to us today. And we'll get there. We'll get there. And this happens, of course, to the second temple, which is eventually destroyed by the master's own words, as we were reading in Matthew 24, some 40 years after the resurrection, around 70 A.D. So, but here's the two events. The two events, the two events I want to really, really focus on today is what goes on with Ohala and a temple, and Oholiba and a temple. One, a total rejection. The other, a mixing of things. There is a spiritual story here today that I hope all of us get a chance to really see and understand and apply to our own lives and see what's going on all around us. All right, so you can download this. Obviously, if you have the notes, you can download this right from the app if you need the charts there. So we now know, Saul's already told us, the body's a temple. Messiah told us the body's a temple, right? Destroy this temple in 3 days. I raise it up. Now, obviously, it has multiple meanings to it, but pretty much he's talking about his body. He's talking about the death and resurrection. However, Abba's been telling us about this idea of the temple being the body right from the beginning. It's just people didn't have eyes to see it or ears to hear it. So with that in mind, during the time of Ezekiel, the time of the destruction of the first temple, that is Solomon's temple, listen to, this is just chapter 23. There's so much in Ezekiel we could point to, but we'd be here all night doing it. But here's Ezekiel chapter 23 and verse 1 through 4. It says, "And the word of Yah came to me saying, Son of man," that's Ezekiel, calling him a human being. "Son of man, there were two women." So he's using sort of a parallel or a parable to sort of tell the story. "There were two women, daughters of one mother, and they whored in Egypt." So the mother there is Sarah. They're daughters of Sarah. They're daughters of Sarah and Abraham, children of Abraham, and they become the house of Israel. Where? In Egypt. And Ezekiel's telling us, in Egypt, they whored. We know this. We've read this before. We've talked about this before when we did the whole adultery and idolatry thing. So some ground we've covered, but we want to look at some nuances here. "And they whored in Egypt," Mitzrayim. "They whored in their youth. Then their breasts were handled, and their maiden nipples were squeezed." Very, very sexual terms, obviously. "And their names were," so he's going to name the two women, was while we're talking about them as two women, what they actually are is one nation. Or we should say they were one nation. They will become one nation again. Today, they are two nations scattered all over the world. So here's the names, which goes back to the chart that we just looked at. He says, Ohala, the elder, and Oholiba, her sister, and they were mine. So sometimes he talks about us as two women, sometimes as one woman. But it depends on the story, on the context of what he's trying to tell us. "And they bore sons and daughters. And their names," so he's going to give us really the capital cities of these two places, the northern house and the southern house. Samaria. I know it says Shamaron, but we know it more in an English context as Samaria. Samaria, or the northern house, Israel, is Ohala. And Jerusalem, or Jerusalem, is Oholiba, or Judah. All right, so he's telling us about these sisters who were whores, who were prostitutes. They played the harlot. Both of them did. And he names them. And the names, like we've been going over in our morning manners, names are important. There is no name that's thrown out there, either in the Hebrew or the Septuagint, There is no name that is thrown out there that is arbitrary. And Abba is in control of it all. Nothing's going to happen of any importance to us or relevance to us. Nothing's going to slide by our Father. So here's the names. Ohala, the northern house, that is the house of Israel. Solomon's kingdom gets split up. The word Ohala literally means her own tabernacle. All right, we're using the word tabernacle, but let's combine it with the words from tent to tabernacle to temple to this temple, right? So that's the progression through history. So the northern house, the name they receive as harlots is their own temple, her own way, I guess you could say. And of course, the temple being this. But Oholiba, and let me just highlight it here again for you guys so you guys can see where we are. We're right down here. So Ohala means her own tabernacle or her own tent. Tent. Oholiba means, which again is the Judah, the southern kingdom. My tabernacle is in her. And you realize, as hopefully you realize as you're reading this, he's making a reference to what the northern house has done with their tabernacle. And they created their own tabernacle at some point, right? Because eventually the northern house, which secedes from the southern kingdom, they set up their own type of worship eventually. Then it turns into a total Baal thing, a total rejection of Elohim. And eventually they set up their own temple on Mount Gerizim, which becomes the conversation that the Messiah has with the woman of Samaria in John chapter 4. They literally went their own way. They were their own tabernacle or temple. And of course, the master says there's not going to be worship on that mountain, on Gerizim, or in Jerusalem. He's talking about both tabernacles, the one they made up and the one that's in Jerusalem. And that's true. There is no worship in either one of those. And yet these two names have a great relevance to who we are today and what's going on all around us. So Ohala, her own tabernacle. But Oholiba, the history of Judah, is different. Judah didn't reject Elohim. Judah didn't just outright say, we want nothing to do with Elohim anymore. What Judah winds up doing is mixing the things of the pagans, mixing the things of Babylon and all the other empires that come after, all the other religions really that come after her, get mixed into the temple, into Abba's temple. So Father's upset with both of them. For the one who wants to create their own temple, which is totally outside of what Abba's instructed to do, Ohala, and at Oholiba, where his temple actually is, the both of them have committed idolatry or have committed adultery. One in total rejection, the other in the mixing of things. Okay, so with that said, then let's take a look at these two sisters. First, let's take a look at Ohala, the northern house. Let's discover what their issue is with their temple, what they're doing, meaning their bodies, but also the temple they're going to eventually build, their rejection of the things of Abba. Hosea chapter 2 and verse 2, the whole book of Hosea is an awesome read, another study one day we'll eventually get to. But listen to what chapter 2, verse 2, he's talking about the northern house. He's talking about the scattering of the northern house. It says, strive with your mother, Israel, the northern house, strive. For she is not my wife, nor am I her husband. He's rejecting the northern house. The northern house is not going to be part of the marriage covenant anymore. A remnant eventually is going to come back, a remnant of the northern house, or what will become the Gentiles, and a remnant of Judah. They're going to come back later, but that's the story for later. But for right now, here's the problem. Here's the issue. Let her put away her whorings. Let me make this bigger and underline a little bit. Here we are. Let her put away her whorings. And by whorings, he means idolatry. So now you realize, what Saul was talking about in 1 Corinthians 6 is absolutely relevant to all of this. He was comparing an earthly issue with what had gone on historically, but also telling us of things to come in the future. Let her put her away for her whorings, her idolatry from her face, and her adulteries from between her breasts. Lest I strip her naked, meaning destroy her, and he does. Abba destroys the northern house. The nation of Assyria comes down, scatters them, and shall set her up as on the day she was born, and shall make her like a wilderness, and shall set her like a dry land. We'll learn more about the way she was when she was born when we get into Ezekiel, when he talks about Jerusalem, because it's when he's talking about Jerusalem's beginning, it's also the beginning of the northern house as well. They have the same beginning. So he says, I'm going to make you as you were in the beginning, in a wilderness, and he shall set her in a dry land, and shall put her to death with thirst. So this judgment that is coming upon the northern house for their harlotries, their adulteries, is serious. This is serious. Verse 5, for their mother, the northern house, has whored. She who conceived them has acted shamelessly. Again, whoring, harlotry, idolatry. For she said, I go after my lovers who give me my bread and my water, my wool and my linen, my oil and my drink. He's telling us the northern house is going to reject. I mean, just outright reject Abba and totally turn themselves over to other gods. They will build their own tabernacle. She is her own tabernacle. Ohala. This is what the writer in Ezekiel is speaking of. Here's chapter 4, same book. I'm sort of skipping a little bit just to sort of give you guys a little Reader's Digest version of what's going on here. But here's chapter 4, book of Hosea, verse 1. Hear the word of Yah, you children of Israel, northern house. For Yah has a case against the inhabitants of the land. For there is no truth or loving commitment or knowledge of Elohim in the land. They chose to forget about Elohim in again, Ahab and Jezebel. They chose to reject the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and to worship all these other things, and then get wiped out and scattered all over the place, where they're going to continue. Their descendants are going to continue. You just said, I'm not only have something against you, I have something against your descendants as well. So there is no truth, no loving commitment or knowledge. So the people who are the spiritual and physical descendants of these people of the northern house, which becomes the nations, there is no truth in them. There is no loving commitment in them. And there is no knowledge of Elohim amongst them. Doesn't mean they don't have a tabernacle. Of course they got a tabernacle. Doesn't mean they don't worship. But whatever they do in rejection of Elohim. There's the pattern. There's the story that helps us identify where we are today. It says swearing and lying, murdering and stealing and committing adultery have increased. Where? Among this group of people and their descendants, all the way up to where we are today. And bloodshed follows bloodshed. Pretty much, he's sort of describing the history of humanity for the last 6,000 years. It has been swearing and lying, murdering and stealing, committing adultery, and bloodshed follows bloodshed. That pretty much summarizes human history right up until today. Verse 3 says, therefore the land mourns, and everyone living there languishes. With the beast of the field and the birds of the heavens and the fish of the sea are taken away. However, look what it says. However, I put there in green so it pops out at you. However, let no one strive or reprove another, for your people are like those striving with a priest. So this people who's going to reject knowledge, not only do they reject knowledge, they're going to argue with the priest. They're going to be in opposition to the priest. So even if they hear it from Judah, even if they hear it from Levites, they're in opposition to it. Remember, it is Isaiah who's concerned. He's the only guy left. right? I think the Berit Hadashah, the New Testament writings speak of it. Saul speaks of it in Romans, and then of course it's also in the Torah or in the prophets, the story of Elijah. And he thinks he's the only one left. He thinks he's the only one left because all of them have been killed off. All the prophets of Yah have been killed off. But just like it tells us in the story, there was a remnant. There's always a remnant. But the majority argued with the priest. And that's what he's telling them right here. Let's see, verse 5. And you shall stumble in the day, and the prophet shall also stumble with you in the night. And I shall make your mother perish. Here it is, guys. This is so important. My people, the northern house, have perished for lack of knowledge. Guys, this is all about knowledge. This is all about understanding. This is all about gaining interest. This is all about gaining fruit. This is the fruit that he's talking about, understanding of who Elohim is, understanding of the story as it unfolds, understanding what it is that Abba has given us to do in every age that there is. We all needed to understand a piece or a part of it, whatever part we lived in, but you and I live at the end. We should now understand the whole picture. But my people have perished for lack of knowledge. Because you have rejected knowledge, I reject you from being priest before me. Because both houses were priests. All of Israel were priests. That's the job Abba gave them. They are the priests of the world. And even still today, the Jews are still the priests. How do we know? Because every time you open up your Bible, it's written by them. Every word we read is coming from the priests of Israel, the Jewish people speaking to us of both the northern and the southern kingdom to tell us the truth. So they're still serving as priests today. He says, I reject you, the majority of them, from being a priest, except for the remnant, since you have forgotten the Torah of your Elohim. So the northern kingdom wants nothing to do with it. You know, they've turned themselves over to it, all the Baals and all the other stuff that there is, all the other gods, or no God, or just promiscuity, worshiping other things. They built their own tabernacle. They did with their bodies what they wanted to do and not what it is that Abba instructed them. So what's going to happen? Guys, this is a far-reaching prophecy all the way up till today. He says, I will also forget your children. That is all the descendants and descendants and descendants and descendants that have the same mindset they do. That is, no knowledge of Elohim. Want to do things their own way. We have our own temple, our own tabernacle, all the worship of all the different gods, of all the different religions, of all the things going on. These are the descendants of those people, the nations. They are mixed in amongst the nations. They are scattered. And he says, and I will forget your children. As they were increased, so they sinned against me. My glory they have changed into shame. They eat the sin of people like priests. I'm sorry, I read the wrong. They eat the sin of my people and lift up the desire of their crookedness. And it shall be like people, like priests. And so this is everybody does this. The Levites were doing this. Everybody in the northern house was doing this. And I shall punish them for their ways and reward them for their deeds. And they shall eat but not be satisfied. And they shall whore but not increase. For they have stopped obeying Abba. So that's a big description, Reader's Digest version, but still a good description of the problem of the northern house and why Abba was going to destroy it and scatter them all over the world because they were Ohala, because they set up their own temple, their own tabernacle. They did their own thing. They forgot and stopped obeying Abba. They refused the knowledge of Elohim. Obviously, is there a remnant? Just like we're told by Saul, yes, there's a remnant. But the majority of people fall under this. This starts when this is written, but it's still going on today. It's still here today. So they rejected the knowledge of Elohim, rejected him, rejected even the concept of him, and chose to do all sorts of other things. This is what Saul's talking about in Romans 1, when he says that they knew Elohim, but they refused to worship him as Elohim. And so he gave them over to a vile lifestyle. This is what Saul is talking about. He's referring to this as he's speaking to us in Romans. This is what happened to the house of Israel. And not just the house of Israel, all the descendants that came from the house of Israel, all the descendants of the nations were going these ways. This was the sin of Ohala, the northern house. All right, here's the story of the nations. You fast forward all the way through history. You say, well, are the descendants of these people, both physical and spiritual, still here today? Yes. Yes. And they have still rejected the knowledge of Elohim. They still refuse to obey his instructions. It's still about lying and cheating and murdering and adultery and bloodshed for bloodshed. It's still about all of that. And these are just a couple of pictures to sort of bring this home to you, especially with regards to Romans 1, all the things Saul says about this. But guys, this is here today. This is what the pictures you're looking at there are, an absolute rejection of Elohim. These are the descendants of the descendants of the descendants of the descendants, so forth and so forth, for 2,000 years. In all of the Western world and all of the Middle East, all over the world. They are scattered everywhere amongst people, and they've chosen the gods of this world, or just really, I wouldn't say chosen the gods of this world. They chose their own tabernacle. Just like it says, Ohala has her own tabernacle. And you can see there all sorts of crazy pictures, from Capitol buildings to the White House to Jerusalem to Tel Aviv. This is going on all over the world. And this is just one aspect of it. I'm only putting up pictures for one aspect of it. But this is about murders, and this is about wars, and this is about lying and thieving. This is the whole world. I don't have enough room on these slides to give you pictures of the whole world and all the craziness and evil and rottenness and just downright darkness that humanity does to one another. And we're darker today perhaps than we've ever been before. Why is it? It is the words of Hosea, the prophet, coming true even in our day upon them and upon their descendants, because they refused to obey Abba's instructions and they rejected the knowledge of Elohim. And that's where we are today. So the world we see all around us today is the product of this curse. It is the product of all of this. I know there's lots of wonderful things in the world, but you got to look at this from Abba's perspective. All the wonderful things we have, and we do have wonderful things, beautiful things. You know, the earth is absolutely beautiful, and there are wonderful people out there parsed in between everything else that's going on. But the history of humanity is dark, and what people do to each other is dark. And in our world, there is an absolute rejection of the knowledge of Elohim. And these pictures, again, they're just a couple, but they sort of tell the story. And you realize this is not limited. This is all over the planet, all over Europe, all over the Middle East, all over the West. This is everywhere. All right. It's the story of the nations. Now, so if the story of Ohala is the rejection of Elohim, leading to Abba giving us over to a depraved spirit, which is pretty evident, then what is, and that's her temple, it's a story of the temple, then what's the story of Ohalibah? Here's Ezekiel chapter 16 and verse 1, which gives us her story. Now, this encompasses sort of both of their stories, but it focuses on Ohalibah. It focuses on Jerusalem. Chapter 16, verse 1 says, "Again, the word of Yah came to me, saying, Son of man, make known to Jerusalem her abominations, and say, Thus says the Master Yah to Jerusalem, Your origin and your birth are from the land of Canaan. Your father was an Amorite, and your mother a Hittite." He's referring to Jerusalem, right? So he's speaking about the city, because Ohala was Samaria, the capital city, well, it's the capital city, but it's also the name of the actual state, Samaria. And then you have the southern kingdom, Jerusalem, and its capital city, and obviously that refers to Judah. So one refers to the northern house. The other one refers to the capital city of Israel, the northern house. I said the capital city of Samaria. The capital city of Israel, the northern house, and the capital city of Jerusalem, the southern kingdom. So here he's talking about what's their origin. Why does he say your origin's an Amorite and your mother's a Hittite? Because they're the ones that owned Jerusalem before David got there. They're the ones that owned Jerusalem after certainly it wasn't called Jerusalem yet, Salem in the time of Melchizedek, but put that aside a second. All throughout history after that, who owns that land? The nations do. The Hittites, the Amorites, the Jebusites, right? So David has to fight the Jebusites. Another great study one day we'll get into. Getting into Jerusalem, David has to fight the Jebusites to take over Jerusalem. So this is what he's saying. So he's using Jerusalem as a point of reference, as a pictogram, a picture to speak of the whole house of Judah. So your father was an Amorite and your mother was a Hittite. The non-Israelites controlled it. As for your birth, on the day when you were born, your navel cord was not cut, nor were you washed in water for cleansing, and you were not rubbed with salt at all, nor wrapped in cloth at all, which is what you would do to a baby if you really loved it. At its birth, you would do all of these things. So Jerusalem's birth was not good. It was bloody. It was nasty. It was bad. It was the Gentiles, from the Gentiles to the wars with David. It was a bloody beginning. This is the history behind what he's saying. Verse 5, it says, no eye felt sorry for you to do any of these for you, to have compassion on you. So I want you to realize he's painting us a picture of Jerusalem as a young woman. And you'll see this because the birth he's talking about here is the birth of a woman. And this is absolutely connected to, by the time we get to the book of Revelation, there's a Jerusalem who is the bride. Well, this is the forerunner. This is the beginning. This is the pattern. This is so realize this is the mental picture he's painting for us. You were nothing when I found you. You were a bloody mess when I found you. And Abba did something. No, I felt sorry for you. I'm right here on verse 5. It says, no, I felt sorry for you to do any of these for you, to have compassion on you. But you were thrown out into the open field to the loathing of your life on the day you were born. You were an unclean, unwanted child. Jerusalem, or the house of Israel. Judah, but the whole house of Israel. Verse 6 says, then I passed by you and saw you trampled down in your own blood. And I said to you in your blood, live. And I said to you in your blood, live. I have let you grow like a plant in the field. This goes all the way back to Isaiah 5, and he talks about the house of Israel. Jerusalem is a planting of Yah. Well, this is what he's referring to. Isaiah is referring to the very same concept Ezekiel is referring to here. Verse, I have let you grow like a plant in the field, and you are grown and are great. So he's talking about from the time David starts it, which is a bloody mess by the time he gets it from the Jebusites, to the time Solomon comes. Now Jerusalem is quite literally the capital of the world. It is the city set on a hill. That's where we get that phrase from. You hear the famous quote of Ronald Reagan, we're a city set on a hill. No, we're not. We're not. But it comes from this concept. Jerusalem is the city set on a hill, set on Mount Zion. And the light from the candelabra outside shines throughout the Mediterranean at night. So they were great. So the greatness comes from, the blood comes from David getting into Jerusalem. He's not allowed to build the temple. Why? Because his hands are full of blood. But his son builds the temple, Solomon. And in Solomon, the kingdom becomes great. He becomes this wise ruler, where people from all over the world now come to hear him. That's what it means to be great. The Queen of Sheba comes to visit him. People from all the nations come to see Solomon, the greatness of his temple, and to hear the greatness of his God. It says I'm right down here, and you are grown and are great, and you come into the finest ornaments. Breasts were formed, your hair grew, and you were naked and bare. So he's talking about a woman, a young woman coming into her own. This Jerusalem, or Oholibah. Here's verse 8. He says, again, I passed by you and I looked upon you and saw that your time of carnal love was there. She was ready to be given as a bride. She was being prepared as a bride. She had the betrothal contract. She had the ketubah already. She had the commandments. Judah had them in the temple. They were teaching. They were going through the process. It says, and I spread my skirt over you and covered you. We're going to get into this this weekend because he's really talking about an atonement here. This is also a marriage thing, but he's talking about an atonement. I covered your nakedness, and I swore an oath to you. Well, he swore an oath to Abraham, to Moses, and to King David. And the oath he swore to King David is that kingdom there'll always be someone on the throne of his descendants. That is the Davidic covenant. He says, I entered into covenant, the Davidic covenant, the temple covenant with you, and you became mine, declares the master. And I washed you in water, the word, and I washed off your blood, and I anointed you with oil. He's talking about now we're talking about temple terms here, right? So he's talking about Jerusalem, but what's in Jerusalem? The temple is in Jerusalem. The woman has the temple. The woman is the temple, I guess you could say, and which is certainly the analogy we get later on. And so he's going to start now to use temple terms to describe what Abba did through Solomon, really through King David, but through Solomon. I washed you in water. I'm right up here just before at the ending of verse 9. I washed you in water, and I washed off your blood. I anointed you with oil, and I dressed you, the temple, in embroidered work. The angels are embroidered on the veil. They're carved into the walls. We'll get into a discussion of why they have the angels there, what they mean, because it's really a picture of the Maseroth. The whole inside of the tabernacle, the temple, is a picture of the Maseroth. But we'll get into it another time. Too much information for tonight. So I dressed you in embroidered work and gave you sandals of leather. And I wrapped you in fine linen and covered you with silk. He's talking about the temple and all the beautiful things in the temple. And I adorned you with ornaments. And I put bracelets on your wrist and a chain on your neck. And I put a ring on your nose and earrings in your ears and a crown and adorning on your head. Thus you were adorned. And hopefully it pops out there in orange. These are all temple terms. These are all things that go on in the temple. He says he's made this woman beautiful, prepared her to see her coming groom. You were adorned with gold and silver. Your dress was fine linen and silk and embroidered cloth. Blue and purple are the colors that were inside of the temple. You ate fine flour and honey and oil, and you were exceedingly beautiful and became fit for royalty. You were becoming the betrothed bride, waiting for the husband to come and to get the marriage contract going. That's what he's telling him. That's who you were. Verse 14, and your name went out among the nations. Again, the Queen of Sheba hears about it. In Ethiopia comes to hear the wisdom of Solomon, as well as people from all over the world, because of your loveliness, for it was perfect. By my splendor, which I had put on you, declares the master. And here it is. But you trusted in your own loveliness and whored because of your name and poured out your whorings on everyone passing by who would have it. Now, this is different from the northern house. The northern house rejects. They leave. They reject. They walk away from Abba. They try to do their own thing. They become their own tabernacle. They become Ohala. But there's already a temple here, and people are coming to it. They're great. People are coming. But what's happening is they're whoring with the people who come. They're taking little bits and pieces of what they're bringing, and they're bringing that into the temple as well. That's different from just a total rejection of Abba and just going off and being your own tabernacle to being the place where Abba's tabernacle is. He says that Ohaliba, the tabernacle is within her, of being the place where the tabernacle is, where people are coming. But instead of you influencing them, they are influencing you, and you're flirting and you're whoring with them, and you're mixing things now. This is a different issue of the temple. There's the rejection, and now here's the mixing of things. And I hope you guys can see that in the context there. Here's verse 16. And you took some of your garments, purple, blue, the linen, and made multicolored high places for yourself, and whored on them, which should not have come about, nor shall it be, worshiping all the other gods in the temple and outside the temple, on Mount Zion, on all the other mountains around them. And you took your splendid ornaments, my gold, my silver that I gave you, the stuff in the temple, and made for yourself images of a male and whored with them. And you took your embroidered garments and covered them, and set my oil and my incense before them. And my food, which I gave you, the fine flour, oil, and honey, which I fed you, set before you them as sweet incense. And so it was, which I fed you. You set it before them, set it before your lovers, as sweet incense. And so it was, declares the Master. You put pagan idolatry in the temple, in the lives, in both the physical temple that was there and in the temple of the people that were there, because they were part of the mixing. Verse 20, I'm right here. It says, and you took your sons and your daughters whom you bore to me, and these you slaughtered as food to them. He's talking about Moloch and the whole fire and all the rest of that. Were your whorings a small matter? He's saying, do you think this is insignificant? You can't say you've got the temple and you're doing this at the same time. You think this is insignificant? Obviously it's not. That you have slain my children and gave them up to them by causing them to pass through the fire. And in all your abominations and whorings, you did not remember the days of your youth, where he took them from, when you were naked and bare, trampled down in your own blood. So similar verses in Hosea to the northern house. They forgot their beginning. Judah forgot their beginning. Their beginning is similar, is the same actually, but their sin is different. One is of rejection and just totally 100% given over to the pagan nations and scattered now abroad everywhere. The other is keeping a knowledge of Elohim, but mixing it with lots of other things. That is trying to be this bride waiting for a husband and whoring at the same time, which is exactly the scenario of 1 Corinthians 6 that we just read. This is what's happening here. Hope you guys can see that. That's a wow moment. That's like, wow, okay, that's cool. That's impressive. All right. So just so you can see, we're talking about temple items. Here's 2 Chronicles 4:19, which is just describing all the things that this isn't even a complete list, but some of the things that were put into the temple. It says, and Solomon, or Shlomo, had all the furnishings made for the house of Elohim, and the slaughter place of gold, and the tabernacles on which was the showbread, and the lampstands with their lamps of refined gold, to burn according to the right ruling in front of the speaking place, and the blossoms, and the lamps, and the snuffers of gold, the perfect gold, the snuffers of the bowls and the ladles, the fire holders of refined gold, and the entrance to the house, its inner doors of the most sacred place, and the doors of the hekel of the house were so gold, silver, purple, linen, all of this stuff was inside of the temple. This is what Abba adorned Jerusalem with. This was the gifts to the bride as she prepared to meet her husband, or soon to be. And here's what we just finished reading, so that you guys can make the one-to-one comparison here. Here's Ezekiel and chapter 16, verse 16. We just read this, but that you can connect these two things here. And you took some of your garments, the purple, the blue, the linen, and the multicolored high places for yourself, and you whored with them, which you should have not done, not have come about, nor shall it be. And you took your splendid adornments of my gold, my silver, which I gave you, and made for yourself images of gold, and you whored with them. So this is, I just want you to see, this is what Abba is speaking about. So their issue is not total rejection, but a mixing of the knowledge of Elohim with idolatry, which is not a good thing. Not a good thing at all. By the time we get to the end of the book, we read about Mystery Babylon. And what is Mystery Babylon? She's a harlot. And of course, this is connected to Revelation 13 and the beast and the anti-Messiah and 2 Thessalonians 2. And we're going to get into all of that piece by piece in the upcoming weeks as we get closer to discussing the abomination of desolation. And it's going to be in connection with what we're doing on Tabernacles with the name, the mark, and all the rest of that stuff. So all of this stuff is all sort of mixed together, and it's going to crescendo into one bigger concept and idea a little bit further down the road. But here's Revelation chapter 17:3, and see if this doesn't sound familiar. And he carried me away in the spirit. This is Mystery Babylon. This is whatever comes out of Revelation 13. This is what Saul's talking about in 2 Thessalonians, the lawless one to come, a religion that's going to come that will do these things. And he carried me away in the spirit in the wilderness, and I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast covered with the names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. And the woman was dressed in purple and scarlet, and adorned with gold and precious stones and pearls. These are all temple items. The things of the temple were taken from the temple and mixed into this thing. This is what this is. The beginning of this is the mixing of things. And in holding in her hand a golden cup filled with the abominations and the filthiness of her whoring. This is taking the temple stuff and mixing it into something else that's really bad. And the product of the two is a hybrid. It is not the chaste bride betrothed to the Messiah. It is often a combination. And the crazy thing is, a lot of Abba's people are in this thing, which is, of course, what Revelation tells us later on. And you can see in the pictures here, we're talking about Rome. At least Rome as the beginning of this, because it goes way, way beyond Rome, from Rome to Christendom, where Rome is Christendom. But Rome is the beginning of this. They're the ones that took the priesthood from Jerusalem and made a brand new priesthood. They're the ones that took all the gold and the silver and the purple and all that other stuff out of the temple and brought it to the Vatican. And you know, it's probably, some of it is probably, if they haven't melted it down and made all sorts of other things, which is what Ezekiel said that did happen already in the past. If they didn't, then there's a menorah from the Second Temple somewhere in the Vatican, as well as probably lots and lots and lots of other things. So here it is. Here's the gold. Here's the purple. Here's the scarlet. Here's the cup of abominations right in front of us. The Eucharist, the cup of abominations right in front of us. This thing that happened all the way back in the time of Ezekiel, this thing that Messiah warns about, is another aspect of it is coming that Saul warns about, the Revelation 13 warns about. Here we're looking at in our day, we can look back on it and say, oh my goodness, this actually happened. This is what he was referring to. Okay. Just so you realize, this is the Arch of Titus. This is in Rome right now. If you go to Italy, you go through the capital, go through Rome. There is this big arch in the center of the city called the Arch of Titus. Titus is the one who destroys the temple. And what does Titus do when he destroys the temple? Well, you can see they etched it in a carving. This goes all the way back to that time. They etched in the carving the defeat of the God of the Israelites. The God of Israel was defeated by destroying his temple and scattering his people. And what do they bring back to Rome that eventually winds up in the Vatican? Well, they bring back the gold and the silver and the pearls and, the fine linens, everything they could get their hands on that they didn't burn or destroy beforehand, they brought back, including the people as slaves. They brought them back. This is history. Here it is right in front of us. It's almost like Abba took a snapshot and put it up there so we in our day could look back and say, oh my goodness, look, this is what he's talking about. So the temple gets destroyed in 70 AD for the very same reasons that Ezekiel's talking about in his book, that Daniel's talking about. And it's twofold. The northern house, because of rejecting, or Ohala, her rejection causes her to be scattered, her and her children, and at some point are given over to vile affections. Judah kept some of it, but mixed things in the temple. And they're still here today. Both of these are still here today. That is Abba's people mixed in, and Abba's people that have absolutely rejected him. both of them temples, both of them tabernacles, both of them ready at repentance. It is the days of awe at repentance to actually become the temple of Elohim and be the remnant, be the people that he's actually asked us to be. But to do that, here's 2 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 15, last couple of verses. And what agreement has Messiah with Belial? Or what does a believer have with an unbeliever? Now, we read this all the time. It's the whole unequally yoked thing. And most people in the religious world around us read this and they say, well, you're not really supposed to be in business with people who are unequally yoked. Well, that's not really what it's talking about. It's talking about worship. This is talking about worship. He's talking about being involved intimately with worshiping God with others who are being unequally yoked, doing other things, whether it's mixing or just rejecting. What part does a believer have with an unbeliever? And what union has the dwelling place of Elohim with idols? The two cannot exist together. It can't. You cannot be the bride who is betrothed, who is adorned, who is gifted, who is learning the ketubah. You cannot be her and attach yourself to a harlot at the same time. The two become one. You are joined together. And we have to decide which one are we part of. And we've got to take our feet off of being on both sides of the fence. And what union has the dwelling place of Elohim with idols? For you are a dwelling place of the living Elohim, as Elohim has said. I shall dwell in them and walk among them, and I shall be their Elohim, and they shall be my people. And what does he tell them? What does he tell them? Therefore, tell us, come out from among them and be separate. He's not talking about, working with some guy at a job being unequally yoked. He's talking about worship. He's talking about your service to Yah. He's talking about, following Abba's instruction, or saying you follow Abba's instruction, but you keep none of his feast days. You do nothing that he said, or you've replaced it with all sorts of other things that are of the pagans. That is mixing. And we cannot be both. We cannot be unequally yoked. Or we'll love one and hate the other. We have to decide. And that's what he's telling us here. Come out. Be separate. It's not just us. It's been God's people for forever. This issue's been going on. It's just in our day, it's a lot bigger than it ever was before. And do not touch what is unclean, and I shall receive you. Well, on the opposite side, there is no unclean. But everything that we touch on the other side was unclean. From the foods to the holidays, to the doctrine, to all of it. Therefore come out and do not touch what is unclean, and I shall receive you, and I shall be a father to you. And you shall be sons and daughters to me, says Yah the Almighty. So what's the answer to all this? Come out. How do we come out? Well, because Messiah is coming. He's paid the dowry. He's paid the dowry. And Saul is warning us, do you not know you are the temple of the living Elohim? And Elohim's spirit dwells in you, and you are not your own. You were bought with a price, so come out of them. Here's Jeremiah 51, verse 6, talking about the same thing. Flee from the midst of Babel, and let each one save his life. Do not be cut off in their crookedness, for this is the time of the vengeance of Yah, and the recompense he is repaying her. The warning started all the way back then. Come out of Babylon. Stop mixing things. Revelation 18:4. And I heard another voice from the heavens saying, come out of her, my people, lest you share in her sins and lest you receive of her plagues. He's talking about coming out of mystery Babylon. Abba's been calling us to come out for a long time. Ohala and Ohaliba. Whether we pick our own tent and Abba has given us and our descendants over to vile affections, or we have a knowledge and understanding of Elohim, but we're mixing it with other things. Either way, come out of it. Come out of it. Start to learn, start to understand, start to gain knowledge. Start to realize that you are the temple of the living God. And what we do absolutely matters. We serve Elohim. We serve Elohim. And we got to remember that. All right, we're eventually going to get, I promise you, we're eventually going to get to the abomination of desolation. And once you get the whole picture, once you've got all of these studies in and you're able to put it all together, it's a mind blower. It's a mind blower because once you see it, you can't unsee it. Once that bell is rung, you can't unring it. And all of a sudden you see it everywhere. But we'll get there. We'll get there real soon. Guys, don't forget to join me tomorrow morning for our morning matter. We're going to continue with the importance of names in the scripture, another part to this story. So please be part of Morning Matters. If you haven't been, go back and listen to all the ones for the last week or so, and you'll catch up with all the names. We're going to continue doing it right up to Tabernacles. And also, don't forget, there's no Hidden Manna this upcoming Friday night. We won't be back until the 13th of October. But of course, we're going to have our weekend service, and we're going to be memorializing Yom Kippur. We're going to do studies on it, and we're going to give you some information that will help you in your own worship, what you should do on that Monday, and what our mindset should be as Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, the Day of the Covering, comes to us. Guys, in the meantime, have a wonderful, wonderful night. Don't forget, please, to subscribe if you haven't, and have an awesome, awesome night tonight. We'll see you guys this upcoming Shabbat. Guys, peace.